What's up, everybody, and welcome to In Search of Answers, my brand new Q&A series here on YouTube. So much like how Sounds Good Makes Sense is the sort of spiritual successor to the Weekly Marmot, this show will be the spiritual successor to PST, which was the show where you guys asked me questions and I did my best to answer them. We used to do both of those back in the day in Tank Spot. We're doing them again here. This show will be scheduled to come out on Mondays with Sounds Good Makes Sense, continuing to come out on Thursdays on a normal week. Sometimes I might have to change around the schedule for whatever reason, but generally speaking, we should have this show on Mondays as well as on Thursdays for Sounds Good Makes Sense. And then if you have a question that you would like me to answer, the topic is pretty broad, whereas Sounds Good Makes Sense is still primarily a World of Warcraft show. WoW questions are perfectly fine for this episode or for this show, but anything even generally related to the gaming and entertainment industries is fine for it. So if you have thoughts about different games, if you have thoughts about, I don't know, even movies, comic books, and so on, feel free to send in those questions and I will do my best to answer them as much as I possibly can. As far as how to submit those questions, you can just leave a comment here on YouTube for this episode, and that will put your question in the running for inclusion in the next episode. Or if you are on Patreon, patrons get a perk where you get basically first crack at priority in terms of getting your question answered. So if you go over to Patreon and you look at the post for this episode, I don't know why that was hard to say. If you go over to Patreon and you look at the post for this episode, you will see that there is a link to a form that you can fill out that will allow you to submit your question. So that will be how to send in these questions. I'll go over that again at the end of the episode, but let's get started. Let's go with our first question for today, which does come from Patreon, where Ganrock asked, a lot of people on Reddit are saying that Season of Discovery is just a quote-unquote beta, and the end result will be a permanent Classic Plus version of the game. Do you also think this? Do you think SOD is just the second season in a long series of WoW seasons, a la Diablo, or do you think something else entirely? So I did an episode of Sounds Good Makes Sense a few weeks back where I was talking about, is Season of Discovery just Classic Plus already? Or is it more of like a beta for Classic Plus? And my conclusion there was pretty similar. Like, I think a lot of the ideas of Season of Discovery is them just sort of trying things out and seeing how things go. There's a lot of experimentation happening, which is great, and I love to see it. I suspect that realistically, they're going to be looking at and then making that decision towards the end of the Season of Discovery life cycle. We know that SOD is scheduled to run basically all through the rest of 2024, according to their roadmap. Obviously, things might change, but that's currently the plan. So I do think it is possible, excuse me, I do think it's possible that we will see a permanent Classic Plus version of the game afterwards. I don't know yet whether I'm ready to say that that is absolutely firmly going to be the case, or the other possibility that they could go with it is they could just look at the way that Season of Discovery went and then incorporate some aspects of Season of Discovery into whatever the next season is. Because I do think, regardless, we are going to have more seasons for WoW Classic after Season of Discovery concludes. They've even said that they could start looking into doing seasons as, like, when people were talking about how they're doing away with Wrath of the Lich King and now there's currently no way to play Burning Crusade. They were talking about potentially bringing those back as seasons in the future, which I think is a very good idea. So it's possible that Season of Discovery will roll into Season of the Burning Crusade or something, and they will continue to utilize like the rune system or some variation of it for stuff in the future. I definitely think we're going to see a lot of what we're currently seeing in Season of Discovery continued to be applied to Classic in the future and to different versions of Classic in the future. Whether or not that means they're going to fully branch something out into a Classic Plus, or if they're going to just continue to iterate and have some elements of this stuff in future seasons, that still remains to be seen. I could see them going either way with it. I also think that kind of, I alluded to a moment ago, that is a conclusion that will not be made until we've seen the entire life cycle of Season of Discovery. It's just too early to state anything for absolutely certain. Especially looking at like how much of a drop off in play there's been from phase 1 to phase 2. And how like there are questions that need to be answered still of how much longevity there is to something like this. Is it a fun experiment that we can play with for a few months and then people will lose interest? Or is it something that, yes, this needs to be fully supported and something that there's a market to continue using and continue playing for long periods of time? So I don't think we really know yet. I do think we're going to see some more seasons for sure. I don't yet know if those new seasons will basically just be continuations of Season of Discovery, or continuations and iterations on the idea of Season of Discovery, or if they're gonna keep seasons as this like weird way to experiment with stuff and create an entirely new Classic Plus. I would be very disappointed if the answer was neither. If we don't end up with some form of whatever Season of Discovery now is continuing on in some capacity, if we don't end up with something along those lines in the future, I would be disappointed. But again, who knows? Maybe we get to the end of Classic life cycle, we get up to level 60, and we start going, this is actually not that great for whatever unforeseen reason. I don't know. I think it's too early to say for certain whether or not this is like if their plan is to come out with a Classic Plus later on. I think their plan right now is to continue supporting Season of Discovery and then figure out what else they're going to do later on in the future. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on that one. And you can definitely go check out the video that I posted, the Sounds Good Makes Sense episode that I posted a few weeks back. That was just titled like is Season of Discovery Classic Plus or something like that. You can go check out that episode if you want more thoughts on that subject. Let's move on to the next question. This one comes from Heron D66 on YouTube, who said, would it be possible to create a new MMO without using the holy trinity of tank, healer, and DPS? So first off, yes, absolutely. Like MMO just means massively multiplayer online. There are tons of games that qualify as an MMO that already exist that don't use the tank, healer, DPS trilogy or playstyle at all. Like Star Citizen, for example, is an MMO currently in development that is absolutely nothing to like. I don't know how you would even implement that sort of thing inside a game like Star Citizen. There are lots of games that have started to pull MMO style elements into them that wouldn't typically be considered MMO, like PlanetSide, for example, MMO FPS. There's no tank, healer, DPS sort of triad in that either. So yes, it's absolutely possible. I think the bigger question here, and part of why I selected this one to talk about, is it almost asks the reverse question for me. Is it actually possible to make a new MMORPG that functions in the same sense as World of Warcraft did, or Final Fantasy 14, or whatever, like Guild Wars 2, and so on? Is there actually room in the market for that sort of thing? We know that there's a few in development. There's a few games along those lines being developed. So again, yes, the answer is probably yes. Obviously, it still can be done. I just think the shape of what those games are likely to look like for a modern audience is going to be quite different. There's a lot of things that have been, how do I say this? A lot of things in gaming that have been sort of improved over the years, or new ideas have been touched on, and so on, where we're less likely to get just a straight up like WoW clone these days. Whereas we used to be like those were everywhere. It was every single game that was coming out. Looking at New World, for example, New World is a game that does, at least in PvE, have the tank, healer, DPS sort of hybrid to it, or the Holy Trinity to it. But it feels like it was something that was sort of slapped on at the end when they decided they wanted to have dungeons in their otherwise PvP game. And it's a little bit awkward how it all comes together. And probably would have been something that, actually thinking about it, probably New World would have been a better game overall. I still enjoy New World. I don't think it's a bad game at all. But it would have been a better game overall if they had started by just saying, yes, let's have tanks, healers, and DPS be specs, instead of where they ended up, which is this kind of weird, like, yes, there is a healer spec. There's a couple like healer, well, weapons really, but there's a couple ways to be a healer in New World. And then if you want to be a tank, you basically have to slot a gem, and then that changes how some of your abilities work, which is just kind of feels weird and a little like tacked on, is how I would put that. But yes, to answer your question, absolutely, it's possible to have MMOs without tank, healer, DPS. Like EVE Online is one that's definitely an MMO that's been around for a long time, and it doesn't have tank, healer, DPS. It's very, very different. So yeah, absolutely, in answer to your question. Next question comes from Fangs the Wolf on YouTube, who said, what are your thoughts on the secrecy around 10.2.6? So I'll start this one off with just like a reminder / caveat that I haven't been paying super close attention to Dragonflight. I've been really focused on Season of Discovery. So it's entirely possible that I've missed something. That said, it seems like there isn't that much to have missed about 10.2.6 at this point. They're really, really keeping it tight-lipped and as under wraps as possible. And whether or not that was a good idea or not, I think we won't actually know until Tuesday when 10.2.6 actually drops. I think we won't actually know if it was good to keep so much secrecy around this until we know what it is. there's certainly a lot of risks involved in it. One is obviously they're not doing any public testing. So not doing public testing on something, depending on what it is, if it's not something that they could have handled all the testing for internally, then there's a lot of risks involved in, okay, we've now released this to everyone and it's just super broken and doesn't work at all. Definitely a big risk, again, depending on what it is. It does mean that there isn't like a ton of data mining. There isn't a ton of spoilers coming out for it. It is unfortunate. I was actually watching a Bellular video where Bellular and like they were talking about a whole bunch of other stuff that other people had said about the fact that EU doesn't get it until the next day. So it is super unfortunate. Like they're doing all this secrecy to try and keep it a secret, and it's just going to get spoiled a day in advance for most of the world anyway. Like that does suck. I don't like that. I definitely think, like, I know that Holly Longdale had said on Twitter that they wanted to do a global release for it and talked about it, but couldn't make it happen. That to me means, okay, then why be all so extra secret about it? Like, I don't know. It's a little bit awkward, a little bit janky to be super secretive about something that you know is going to get spoiled to most of your audience. It's entirely possible. I know a lot of people on, I believe it was Friday, were talking about the like big announcement that they waited all day for, which just ended up turning out to be a release date and like literally nothing else. And so some people have been theorizing that like maybe they had to change their minds about things at the last minute, or they had like, because it came out pretty late in the day too. Maybe there was some sort of like internal like, oh God, something's broken. We have to change how we're announcing this now. And they had to like can a whole bunch of a bigger announcement that they had planned. Perhaps it's an interesting theory. I don't know if that's actually what happened or not, but it is an interesting theory, and it would definitely track. And maybe the global release was what had to get canned at the last minute. Maybe it was something where they were like, crap, this isn't working. And we're worried about it rolling out and breaking, and it breaking everywhere all at once instead of breaking in one little area or something like that. I don't know. We'll see. I definitely think like if it works out to be a success, if it's both an event / whatever it is that they're doing that benefits from being kept secret up until it's actually out and playable, and it works out, then it's cool. I still would like to see a global release for it, but I do think there is some potential for it to be very cool. I am always very skeptical of secrecy as like a hype building mechanic, because I don't know, to me, if the reason people are excited for your thing is because it's a secret and you're waiting to announce it, and that's the only reason they're excited for it, and if that's the route that you go to make people be excited by your thing is by specifically keeping it secret, that starts to ask some questions about like, is that because your thing that you're trying to keep the secret isn't actually that cool? Like, is it just not cool enough on its own to build hype for? If they had like gone and told everybody what it was going to be ahead of time, would that have resulted in less excitement and less hype than them trying to keep this superly closely guarded secret? I hope that, and I know like a lot of the people behind these, like I used to work with a lot of people behind this stuff at Blizzard, so I know that they're all smart people. So I hope that they've not accidentally pushed themselves into a weird corner here where they're like, people are really excited for this, but it's just like a one-off little event that you do once and never again. Like that would suck. So regardless, I think in answer to the question, overall, my thoughts on the secrecy around 10.2.6, I think it's cool that they're trying it. We will not know until after we know what 10.2.6 actually is, whether or not it was a good idea for them to do it, but still cool that they're trying it. And hopefully it doesn't, hopefully all of the like negative, like this is awful for whatever reason, hopefully the spoilers or whatever, hopefully it's not something that getting spoiled a day early for EU and the rest of the world is a problem. Is kind of where I'm at with it currently. I know one of the biggest theories is that this is the sort of vampire survivors sort of mode that was data mined a while back and has been theorized for a while. If that is what it ends up being, and it's just a game mode and not something that, like, not a big story beat that getting spoiled a day in advance would really be a problem for it, then that could be cool. But again, if it's that, then tell people that so that they're more excited for it. Like, I don't know. I do think we're going to keep this a super big secret, like, hype method is a bit is a bit odd. I don't know how I feel about that yet. We'll know more for certain after it actually reveals, and it's very likely that we'll end up doing a Sounds Good Makes Sense episode on it. But that's for another time. Let's move on. Next question comes from the Sadist God on YouTube, who said, here's an easy one. What's that sword in the back corner? Is that from something or just a cool sword? What sword? Oh, you mean this sword? Yeah, this is, I guess you could say this is from something. This sword is actually my 5-year sword that I got for working at Blizzard for 5 years. So basically, the way that works, I'm gonna try and put this in a spot here where I'm not stabbing myself. There we go. How that works, when you work at Blizzard and you've been there for 5 years, they give you a sword as just like a cool show of like, hey, thanks for 5 years sort of thing. Nowadays, they actually give out a custom sword that was made specifically for Blizzard. But before they started doing that, they actually started that in, I think, 2019. And I hit 5 years in 2018. So this was one of the last ones before they started doing that. This sword was one that they basically just got it off of Amazon. It was like, I don't know, $100, $200, something like that. It's not anything like special in terms of the design. I mean, it's cool. Don't get me wrong. It's not anything special or custom in terms of the design. It's very cool. And that's basically the gist of it. But yeah, that's the story of that sword. This was the sword that I got for working at Blizzard for 5 years. There's a plaque that goes with it as well. And I could like mount it on the wall, and probably will at some point, maybe underneath this completely cool painting that's over here. Maybe I'll mount it over there at some point. It would probably get in the way of the guitar. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But yeah, that's what the sword is. Let's move on to the next question. This one comes from Dead and Cold on YouTube, who said, you said many years ago it was a dream of yours to work for Blizzard, and that dream came true. What game company do you dream about working for now? So I kind of have two answers to this question. One is the just like general life advice of don't dream about work. Like having a dream job is cool and all, and I appreciate the sense that it doesn't necessarily mean that like, this is what you want to do with life in general, but you have to work. And so knowing that you have to work, then having a job that you think would be ideal for you is great. But that is like a driving factor for my life of like, oh man, the most important thing to me as a person is that I get to work at this company. It's not really a thing anymore, at least for me. That's something where I now dream toward things like being able to take care of myself and my family without having to worry about and stress about a whole ton of things, or like having fun times and getting to go on cool vacations and having cool experiences and stuff like that. Those are my sort of like dream goals in life, not necessarily landing a job somewhere. But that's kind of, I think, opposite of the spirit of the question. The question generally being like, what sort of game company or what game company would I want to work for now? And something really important to me, especially after the last few months and over the last year, after, leaving, I went from Blizzard to TikTok, and I worked at like basically going from major corporation to a major corporation. I spent nearly a year at TikTok and then went to Wonderstorm, which was a small indie studio, and found that I feel much happier working for small studios where I feel like everyone there is able to talk to each other, and I feel like everyone's sort of in it together and they're all working towards the same general goals. That sort of environment, that's my sort of preference these days. So as far as like what company would I work for, I don't have a specific name. In fact, ideally, like the company that I would work for would be my own. I would love to actually form my own studio and actually be working on games and getting to do what I want to do in that sense. So that's kind of the dream these days. We'll see if that comes to fruition. I did make the commitment that at some point I will be finishing the tabletop game that I've been working on off and on for the last 15 years now, I think. I originally announced it in the first yearly marmot. So that would have been October of 2010 that I first said that I was working on this game. It's gone through a lot of changes ever since. And there's been a lot of times where I've just shelved it for long periods of time. but it's been an idea kicking around in the back of my mind for a long time. And as part of the streamathon that's been going on and is still going on somehow, my 5-day streamathon is now on day 34 or something like that. It's crazy. As part of that, I made the commitment to actually get back to work on that and end up finishing it. So who knows, maybe that will turn into something that becomes a big deal and will be how I get all of this off the ground and we get started actually making, like I actually get started making my own games. That'd be super cool. But yeah, hope that answers the question. I hope the other answers that I gave as well have more or less answered those questions. If you do have more questions, again, please feel free to leave a comment here on YouTube. Or if you're a patron, you can head over to patreon.com/Devilore. If you're not already a subscriber there, you can sign up, which I would obviously always appreciate. But patrons will be able to, in the description for this episode on Patreon, there will be a link to a form that you can fill out to ask your question for future episodes. So thanks again, everybody, so much for watching. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. See you next time.